Here's our agenda today. Similar to what we normally do, we'll do. I mean, we've already done kind of introduction as to who we are. I wish we had time to go around and hear about who you are. We'll have more sessions like that. We've had some sessions before where people have told their story about where they came from, how they kind of came into Power BI or Fabric or this whole, this whole data viz and BI and design space. We need to do more stories like that. I love to hear where people are coming from and the angles that, and different paths that brought them to this tool. So anyway, we'll do more of that in the future. We have a couple announcements that I'll share, and then by 10 minutes after, I'm going to turn the time over to our speaker, who I will introduce, and I'll let Gaston kind of share a few thoughts about Jordan as well. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about CPUG. For those of you who may be new to our community, we are a collection of Power BI enthusiasts in the Seattle area. We are on the west side of Seattle. That's kind of our focus. Seattle's got this kind of east side and west side. There is a Power BI user group on the east side. They meet out at Microsoft. They usually meet in, Gaston said there's a bunch of like old buildings that no one goes to anymore. That's probably where they meet. But they'll meet in a Microsoft building usually, and they often focus on SQL Server and Excel, advanced Excel stuff, and then they do some Power BI stuff too. We're more hardcore. Like, we're way into Power BI and Fabric and what you can do with the tool and how do we bring data to life. That's what we're all about. So anyway, we love having this community. We have built a booming community, and we're so glad you're all here. Why do we meet? We try to be an inspirational community. Like, we want to inspire each other. We want to share ideas, share best practices. A lot of our community members are brand new to the tool, or maybe have been using it for a year or two. Some of us have been using this thing since, 2015, when this thing first came out. I was one of the super early adopters. I was using this back when it was still under wraps at Microsoft, before it was ever Power BI. I was a Microsoft full-time employee and got to kind of see what was coming. So I've been a fanboy for a long time. Anyway, glad to have you all here, and really excited for future sessions that we have coming up. Here's some ground rules, and these are things because this is the type of community we are. Like, be visible if you're comfortable. Please be aware of other people. Give everyone time, if you have questions and stuff like that. Be friendly, be patient. Everyone is welcome. Everyone is respectful, and we honor all viewpoints, all questions. There are no bad questions, no dumb questions. Feel free to be a challenger if you want to. Say, hey, what about this? Or I thought of that. That's fine. Like, bring yourself to these community meetings. That's what we really want. We really want to be a kind and considerate and open environment, because a lot of us are learning still and brand new to this. A lot of us have had a ton of experience and can share some ideas and best practices. So everyone's voice matters. That's just what I wanted to share there. Okay, no big updates this month as far as announcements. We do have an on-site, in-person get-together that we're planning to do soon. I don't know if we haven't decided if we're going to broadcast from a remote location or just get together and share some appetizers and drinks and enjoy one another's company, but that's coming. So we don't have a date yet, but I'm guessing end of summer, maybe September, maybe October. We're going to actually have a physical get together in a Seattle area instead of just virtual. Also share. So we're going to come up with some ways to help people share ideas and capture those ideas somewhere. We're tossing around whether to do that in like a Teams chat or to do it in Meetup somewhere. There's some boards and things we can do in there. But for now, during this meeting, post it in the chat. Like, if you've got an idea, if something comes to mind, if you've seen an article you really like, drop it in the chat. It's great to help each other out with that kind of content. All right, and with that, boom, on we go. I'm just going to do a quick intro, and then Gaston, I'm going to turn it over to you. But I've been working with Jordan for quite a while now and seeing some of the capabilities and stuff that he's helped build. It is awesome. And the stuff that we're going to hear today about what you can do with Fabric and monitoring and making sure that adoption is happening in your organization and understanding what the use cases are and who's doing what within your organization. It's really, really powerful stuff. And this goes beyond what we've been able to do with Power BI. Like, there's some really cool stuff coming in Fabric. So Jordan's going to do that. He is a senior consultant at Slalom. He's with our Microsoft data and AI team, which is a team that partners very closely with Microsoft. So it is part of the company Slalom, but we have tight relationships with Microsoft, and Gaston can maybe touch on that a little bit as well. Jordan is one of our Power BI and Fabric architects and is creating all kinds of value with the stuff that he does. So I'm really excited to hear what he's got to share with us today. I think it's going to be some really compelling stuff, and it'll open up your eyes to some new things you might not have even thought about. So, and before I kick it over to Jordan, Gaston, anything else you want to add before we hand the mic?
Yeah, right on. Gaston Cruz here, as Ross mentioned before, we're kind of one of the co-organizers for this community. Uh, Today, we're here to kind of have talk and discuss about the Power BI monitoring tool. And this applies to Power BI as well to the Microsoft Fabric stage. Jordan is going to be joining us today to share a little bit, and this is kind of really meaningful for this kind of communities. Is a little bit of understanding what is the platform framework, what we can discuss in terms of out of the box tools coming right away for admins of the Power BI platform or the Fabric platform, and then how we can enhance this framework. And this is something kind of a open discussion that we've been having with multiple clients at this point, that they're willing to see if there's a fit to enhance more kind of that monitoring framework across Power BI as well with Fabric. Remember that is really meaningful for the Microsoft product team to keep connected in terms of, they're not only willing to kind of help us to bring the best tools, in this case for Power BI or for Fabric, they are really eager to learn from all of us how we've been implementing Power BI and Fabric with clients on every single specific use case or scenarios. That is really awesome to share with the product team itself. You have multiple platforms. You can go to ideas.powerbi.com or ideas.microsoftfabric.com, and you can post whatever you think that could be helpful for the platform. So welcome, Jordan, again. It's been a pleasure to work with Jordan in the last few years, and happy to learn from him in terms of how he's been implementing this kind of a monitoring for us.
Ooh.
Yeah, thank you, Russ, and thank you, Gaston. Great intro, and hello, everyone. I think you guys covered it in terms of the context and setting the stage here, so I think we can just jump right in. Today, we're going to start with a little bit of context and background about why monitoring is important within an organization and within your governance strategy. Then we'll move into some of the native options that we see in Fabric just out of the box, and then get into our solution, figure out what gap it covers, discuss some of the output of the solution, and then next do a little deep dive into the Fabric components. For those that aren't familiar with Fabric, that's okay. This will be more of a high level discussion, but wanted to get your start thinking about some other capabilities that exist now that Fabric exists. And then lastly, we'll wrap up with some final thoughts and then hopefully have some time for questions at the end. But that said, as I'm talking, if you want to raise your hand, I am able to monitor the chat and we can stop and take your question then as well. So as Power BI developers, analytic developers, you're very familiar with this life cycle of data sources, getting the data, KPIs, report developments. And in Slalom, we've seen that clients are also very adept. They are really good at this process until the end. Most of the time they publish their reports, they close their stories in Azure DevOps, and then because the pace of business moves on, they kind of move on too. And the last phase here of monitoring the reports that they've produced or monitoring their tenant really doesn't happen, or it doesn't happen with enough priority as it really should. And indeed, Microsoft agrees. So looking here on the left side, we can see the Microsoft Fabric Adoption Roadmap, which used to be known as the Power BI Adoption Roadmap. And these are 12 different pillars that Microsoft thinks are critical for successful adoption of Power BI, but then also maintenance of the platform over the long term. And as you can see, governance and system oversight, which this solution will directly help with, are super critical. And then there are other areas within the adoption roadmap, such as user support, change management, mentoring and user enablement, where this solution and this sort of data that we're going to talk about really can help organizations upskill their employees and make sure that they're using data in the most effective ways possible. So now that we've covered, the context of monitoring and why it matters, for those that haven't talked about Fabric, let's just do a quick overview. So released last year to GA, Microsoft Fabric is an end-to-end software as a service, analytics and data platform. It's essentially Microsoft's big bet on the future of analytics. Across the top here, you'll see a variety of different workloads, some that you recognize very well, like Power BI, others like Data Factory and data engineering that you might recognize if you're familiar with some of the Azure standalone services, and then some other services like Data Activator, which are net new. So Fabric brings together all these workloads within a single unified platform. And then underneath that has tons of shared assets. One of the biggest is OneLake, which is a single organization-wide data lake, which you can think of as the OneDrive for data. This is where all the storage and all the output for the entire organization occurs. And then below that, you've got a variety of shared services, whether it's related to security and governance, compute and storage, that all underpin all these workloads all at once. So the benefit to organizations is you make one purchase, you buy one platform, and you get all these capabilities with a nice SaaS foundation and SaaS wrapper. So you don't have to individually stand up all these different services and connect them all, which leads to a lot of additional overhead. So we've talked about Fabric a little bit, brand new platform, awesome. Now let's cover how does monitoring fit into Fabric as a platform out of the box. And so Fabric is a wide and broad platform, and there are quite a few different experiences within the platform that provide some level of monitoring. And we'll just talk about those quickly here. So first you have the monitoring hub, and on the side we've got a little screenshot. This is purely operational data. This is where you can see if your semantic model refreshed or your pipeline refreshed successfully and get some details about that very tactical and operational data. For those that are capacity admins in the group, you're probably familiar with the Fabric Capacity app, which was previously known as the Power BI Premium Capacity Metrics app. This provides direct insight into your underlying compute. Do you have reports or data models that are really high usage that might need to be looked at and optimized? But a fantastic first stop. It's a free app provided by Microsoft, very easy to install. Going a level deeper, we have another app provided by Microsoft. So this one has some setup and some configuration costs called the Log Analytics Template. If you really need to understand which queries are being generated by which users and how long those queries take, this is a tool for you. But again, it does have some cost components, but it really gives you that fine-grained detail that you need to troubleshoot and optimize a data set. For those familiar with Microsoft Purview, which is a governance platform provided by Microsoft, there is a Purview integration here that is still kind of in its beginning phases. This one focuses on things like sensitivity classifications or endorsement. Do you have data sets or reports that have been certified or endorsed within your organization? And then lastly, we have a relatively new, probably within the past year, feature usage and adoption report. Now, this report does start to get the type of information that we'll be talking about later. How many users are using your platform? What are the most common activities? What workspaces are they working in? But right now, this information is very limited. I would expect that this report, which is provided for free and out of the box to all Power BI admins, I would expect to see a lot of growth within this report in the future. But right now, because it is newer, the amount of data points and the type of visualizations that are available is a little bit more limited. So as you can see, there's quite a few, and I'm probably missing some, to be honest. But what you'll notice is that we've talked about monitoring being super critical, and that it's critical from the governance and the adoption perspective, and that most organizations, they don't do it right away, or they don't do it with the priority that they need. But you may have noticed from the previous slide that a lot of those options I talked about really focus on performance. How's my capacity doing? What queries are being run? And they don't really talk about the platform itself. Are people using the reports that I built? Do we have users that are sharing things that they shouldn't be sharing, or have access to things that they shouldn't have access to? And so that's right now in our eyes a gap, and that's what we hope to solve with this solution. And as we'll see, Fabric as a platform makes it really easy to do all the stuff that we need to do, from gathering the data to manipulating it to finally serving those reports. So with that, we'll start to look at our solution. This is something that we built internally, we use internally, and we've also shared with clients. The focus really here, again, is to showcase what we've put together, to give you some ideas in terms of what might help you and your organizations move forward with Power BI and with Fabric. Our solution provides a variety of governance and who is doing what type information rather than performance. From the inventory and user perspective, we provide a ton of usage and activity data. We provide catalog information, so you understand what actually lives in my tenant, what have people produced. And then critically around access control, we have licensing and permission and access control data as well, along with some data lineage components. We also provide an enterprise data dictionary, which is always up to date, completely searchable, and covers the entire tenant. So every single measure in your tenant can be represented in this data dictionary with very minimal manual effort. Additionally, we have additional data source kind of lineage component here, where we can say this particular table in Power BI came from this Snowflake database in this table, which is really critical for auditing and migration efforts. And then lastly, for the Power BI admins of the group, we provide a tenant setting report. This takes tenant settings, which are typically locked away to just those that have the admin credentials, which is usually a very small group, and makes it available for the broader community. So if you're looking at Guy in the Cube online and they're doing something really cool that you like, but you can't figure out why it's not working in your tenant, this is a really great place to start to understand that maybe a setting just is turned off and now you need to have a conversation with your admins. So this is the kind of the high level overview of what we provide. Next, we'll dive into a quick demo of the solution and the output. And then after that, we'll jump into the architecture. But I'll take a pause here. Are there any questions before we move on?
Hey, Jordan, I'd actually posted one. You mentioned the Power BI monitoring. I heard they were deprecating that app and that the Fabric app was the only one left. Is that true, or can you still do both? Do you know?
You mean the capacity metrics app?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so it's fully been replaced, I think, at this point. Maybe it needs to be deprecated, but right now, the Fabric Capacity Metrics app will give you all the same functionality as the previous app, plus the new Fabric workloads as well. So if you were to install that net new today, you would install the Fabric Capacity Metrics app, even if you only care about Power BI.
Thank you. That's what I thought. Thank you. Good to hear.
Yep. All righty. So now we'll switch into a demo. Again, this will be pretty high level, but I just wanted to give you a sense of what we're working towards with this solution. We serve up all of our data using a Power BI app to align with best practices. And across the left here, you can see the different reports. So our inventory and activity report, data dictionary, and tenant settings. And we'll step through these a few different tabs out of each report just to give you a sense. So here is the activity report. We're seeing high level information across the entire tenant. We can search by workspace or by type of activity, by date. Essentially, with all these reports, any dimension you can think of for Power BI, whether it's workspace or user or data set or report, we either have filtering in place, or of course we can build filtering on top of it. So we can see how adoption of the platform is going by user activity over months. We can see the top users, the top workspaces, the top apps, and we can even drill into things like data to understand how people are using our platform. Of course, view report is the most common activity, but we're seeing a lot of analyzed by external applications and analyzed in Excel. These data points really help when you're trying to understand, are people using the platform the way we want them to, or the way we've trained them to, or are they still going back and in this case using Excel, which is maybe something we're trying to move away from organizationally. From a catalog point of view, again, across the entire tenant, we can tell you what exactly lives in your tenant, how many reports, how many dashboards, how many data sets. Here we start to see who your most prevalent creators are. one thing that we found that organizations typically have small BI and central data teams. And to really scale the impact of those teams, you have to rely on technical people from the business. So power users that really say, I love Power BI, I want to learn more. Having this data allows you to find those people within your organization, the people that are acting as de facto experts for their departments or their teams. And then you as like a central BI team or the Center of Excellence team can support those users and really help them grow. So in turn, they can help their departments and their teammates grow as well. We can provide data set refresh information across the entire tenant. So as capacity admin, if you think the performance or capacity has been slower lately, now you can go in and look to see, oh, I see this particular data set has an average duration of 11,000 seconds to refresh. That's a lot of time. This would be a great opportunity to reach out to this team and try to understand what's happening here. Is there a way that we can help you optimize so that other users within the tenant have better performance as well? If you work with RLS, row level security, we can take a look at every single data set in the tenant and see where RLS is being applied. If we take a particular role, we can see the exact DAX that was used to define the table permissions that that role can see, along with the members that are part of that role. So as you're thinking again in that security and the governance context, if you know you have very secure data or very sensitive data, you can make sure that the correct role level permissions are being applied. And then more broadly, just the general permission level. Power BI, it's really easy to share things with people, just like everything else in the Office suite. And that is both a blessing and a curse, because organizationally you want to have best practices in place, maybe using AD groups rather than sharing directly. And Power BI natively does not give you any way to see what given items have been shared with which people, or what items a particular user has access to. So here we're seeing all the sharing or all the permissions within the organization. We can drill down to find only AD groups and see which AD groups have what they have access to. We can find access directly granted because they have workspace access versus direct access. All sorts of great permissions that then can now, you can build a backlog. For example, we found a lot of companies don't use AD groups, or they're partially using AD groups. With this sort of information, we can say, okay, we see that this is a very popular data set that has been shared with a ton of individual people. Let's add this one in particular to our backlog to start building out the correct AD groups and shifting the permissions over so that it's easier to manage in the future. So all in all, this report is very comprehensive in terms of what's happening in the tenant, what permissions have been shared in the tenant, and then also what are users doing within the tenant. Again, most of which is not available in any sort of native reporting. If we switch over to the Enterprise Data Dictionary, so again, this is using, I think someone mentioned in the chat, this is all using the Microsoft Metadata Scanner APIs to source all this data, and we'll talk about the architecture here in a second. But here we're looking at data sets and tables and columns across every single data set in the tenant. And I won't go through the data sets, all these tabs, because they're all very similar. But if we look at data sets, for example, we can see the capacity, we can see the workspace, we can see its name, we can see whether or not it's been promoted or certified, that if it has a sensitivity label, as well as the type of connection it uses behind the scenes. And then if people had filled out the description, we would see that here as well. Of course, this is all searchable again by workspace or data set, endorsement, whatever attributes are relevant to the particular item that we're talking about. I do want to showcase the measure one though, because this I think has had a lot of interest across the clients that we've talked to. So as I mentioned, as you know, measures and calculations are critical to reporting. These are the types of things that if you have discrepancies or variances in how one person calculates net sales versus the other, and it shows up in a report, that entire meeting can be derailed. So we've seen that organizations have tried to build data dictionaries more manually using Excel and having to update Excel every time someone updates Power BI. But with manual things, typically manual things don't always happen. And it can be hard to make sure that the data dictionary is up to date and consistent. Using those metadata scanner APIs, we can extract the data directly from the models and present it. so that every time a new column is added, if a new description is added as well, we will see that the next day, and it will be exactly what's found in the model. So here we're looking at data sets, measures, and then if it has been filled out, the description field. And what's even more, and across the top, we can filter by workspace or data set or endorsement. But what's critical here is if we click on the measure, we can actually see the exact DAX that was generated or used for that measure behind the scenes. So let me switch to one just to make this a little so here, if we look at projected engagement revenue, here is that complicated DAX that someone developed to calculate this particular measure. As far as I know, there's no other way to get this level of visibility into the DAX in Power BI, short of opening up the PBIX file or PBIP file yourself manually, or connecting to it via tabular editor. But of course, you have to do that one data set at a time, whereas here we're seeing measures for the entire tenant. And even more crucially, we can search across the entire tenant for a particular measure. So if we look for, say, utilization, which is a very critical measure for us here as consultants, we can see where utilization appears across all of our measures or all of our data sets within the tenant. And so now
so Jordan, you can search for like keywords within the measure itself?
So right now,
or is it looking for fields?
Yeah, so right now in this report, this name field is searching based on the measure name. So this is showing all measures that are named utilization across all data sets in our tenant. But what I'll show in a second is all this data lives in SQL behind the scenes. So you can use your standard SQL regex parsing and searching to search by keyword from within the description or within the measure. It's all super, super flexible.
Got it. There's one other question, Jordan, that was in the chat. The question is it possible to share the reports?
Oh, absolutely. These are Power BI reports, so these can be shared broadly and widely. We would expect the data dictionary would be available to Power users because another great functionality that I didn't mention is as a Power user, you can't see the DAX expressions for the data sets that you're using. So if like a BI team publishes a data set and you're part of a department that wants to use it, you have zero visibility into the calculations that go into that measure. If you had this report set up, you could come in, find the data set, find the measure, and you could see the exact DAX that's being used, which can help you A, write your own DAX for similar measures, but then also B, help you understand the DAX you're working with when you're putting it in a report. So we highly recommend, especially for this data dictionary type report, sharing it widely and broadly so that people have access to this information that they wouldn't have had access to typically. And actually, recently we had a client who, an employee in the client had to wait until they had like a weekly sync with the data engineering team to understand a particular measure because they didn't have this level of access. And so if you can imagine all those times that happens within an organization where either someone gets the answer, but it happens a little bit later, or they just never get the answer, being able to provide this data up front whenever they need it is a really big efficiency gain for sure. And so the last section here in the data dictionary is lineage, and this is still a work in progress. But what we're seeing here is at the Power BI table level, we can tell you what type of connection it was using. And then we can also tell you if it's coming from an upstream source like Snowflake, what database it's coming from, what schema it's coming from, what object it's coming from. So again, this is great from like a migration point of view. If you're switching from on-premise to cloud and you want to know what tables are going to be impacted, or you're making changes upstream, there's no way outside of a custom solution like this to understand what Snowflake tables are going to impact your Power BI reports, as far as I know. Hopefully that's coming with Purview and similar tools like that, but this provides you direct lineage into those source tables, which is very, very powerful. And then the last slide here, the last report that will showcase is a tenant settings report. This one's super simple. Again, it's taking the tenant settings out of the, away from being locked down just to be visible to admins and making them available again to anyone that we choose to share the report with. You can see the name grouped by the particular tenant setting group. We can see whether or not it's enabled. And then if it's enabled, we can see the AD groups that has been enabled for. This seems to be broken right now. It shouldn't be all 30, but you know, you can get the gist of it. And this one again is more minor, but we've seen a lot of enthusiasm from people now knowing exactly how their tenant is configured, so they can reach out to admins and get that conversation going if something isn't working or a new feature has been added that they really want, but the admins aren't quite aware of yet. So this is a nice one to round out our offering and provide a little extra visibility into what's going on behind the scenes in the tenant settings. So that concludes our demo. I'll switch back to the PowerPoint. But if there are any questions, please feel free to share.
Can we get that PBIT file or the how you are just monitoring? Yeah, this PBIT file or this this PPT.
Oh, the PowerPoint. Yes, absolutely. Right, Russ? Do we share the PowerPoints?
Yeah, we often do. Yeah, as long as it's not proprietary or something we're not allowed to share, then yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great.
I'll work with you, Jordan, to find a way to get that out to the community.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, so now we've kind of seen the output and what we're working towards. We'll talk about how Fabric has enabled us to produce all this within a single platform. At a high level, everything has been written in Python, which is kind of the de facto data language right now. Everything gets parsed into relational tables, which makes querying and searching via SQL easy. So if you don't want to use the reports and you want to do something more complex, SQL's there for you. Everything is built entirely in Microsoft Fabric. So if you own Power BI and you pay for Power BI Premium, you also have Fabric. You can build a similar solution using the tools that have already been purchased for you. Nothing net new to buy. And then lastly, as we'll see, everything is backed by Git. So everything is version controlled, which makes for easy deployments and easy modifications and rollbacks if changes need to be corrected. At a high level, this is our solution architecture, and we'll go through these one by one. But what I want to showcase here is kind of the simplicity of it. You know, we have very few items. We've got a notebook, a single notebook, a single pipeline, a single lakehouse, and then a couple of reports. This is all because Fabric makes things so easy. It is so integrated. Each component has so many capabilities. We're able to do a lot with very little. So moving in to the solution, kind of the brains of our solution, as I mentioned, is all Python. They reference the metadata scanner APIs that someone called out in the chat. And we package our Python into what's known as a wheel file, which is just a easily packaged library of our code that we can deploy within Microsoft Fabric. The benefit of having our code in a library versus in notebooks, for example, within Fabric, is we can really reduce the code complexity of those notebooks. And in general, just this packaging really takes away some of that complexity and makes it easier for the end users to utilize the code that you've written. Environment. So an environment is an isolated space within Fabric that you can set per project settings. So Spark settings or Python packages. It allows different projects to have different settings, which allows coworkers within the same workspace to have some flexibility in terms of what settings they use for any particular project, and makes it easier to collaborate. The notebook. So the notebook within Fabric is where you write code. There are quite a few low code and no code options, but notebook is that code first item. It supports Python and PySpark, Scala, Spark SQL, and regular old T-SQL is actually coming to the notebook experience soon as well. For those that have used or haven't used notebooks before, they allow for the combination of code, the output, text, images, markdown, all within the same document, which really makes logging and documentation easy. And what we're showcasing here on the right is a notebook cell where we've got the code, and then directly below it, we have the logging. So a user can come back and see exactly what code was run and exactly what logs were produced, all in the same unified interface, which makes debugging really, really easy. And so in general, I'm not from a Python background. I'm more of a BI developer by training. but Fabric makes Python and the other languages super accessible. So if you've ever had an interest in learning a different language, but felt there were roadblocks in terms of how do I download everything, how do I get my environment set up, how do I deploy it, Fabric makes that easy. And I really encourage you to branch out and try to learn these different languages because they're huge value adds. And again, Fabric makes it seamless. Data pipeline. So a data pipeline is just a grouping of activities to perform a task. In our solution, our pipeline is very simple. We run our notebook, and then we have 2 notifications upon either success or failure to email someone to let them know what happened. But they can be much more complex. They can be nested, so you can achieve modularity. And as I noted here, they do have connectors for both Outlook and Teams, so you can get messages where in the tools that you use for business. But very seamless. It's very easy to build these complex workflows using the out-of-the-box activities provided by pipelines. Next up, we have Lakehouse. So we have chosen to store our data in a lakehouse. It provides capabilities of storing raw files of any type. So CSV, JSON, zip files, those all can be stored in a lakehouse. But additionally, you have the capability of storing tables. And so we use both in our solution. We extract JSON from the APIs, store them in a lakehouse file section, and then convert those JSON files into tables. For us, in our solution, we could do everything we needed with a lakehouse, so we didn't need to also include a warehouse. But in other architectures, you may want one or both or one or the other. But they really provide the best of both worlds, storing raw data, but also making it queryable.
Hey, Jordan, because this is kind of a solution that has been done more than once, you don't have to start from scratch, right? Like this is kind of packaged or ready to go, isn't it? Isn't it kind of faster to implement this if you're starting with this architecture than going from ground zero?
Yes, yeah. So internally, we've packaged this up, and this can be deployed in a new environment very easily, in part because of that Git integration that we talked about, but also just the way the solution has been built, very modular and very easy to set up. So yeah, absolutely. And that's, again, one of the benefits of all the different infrastructure stuff that Microsoft has provided within Fabric. Once you build a solution, it's very easy to redeploy it if needed and make changes.
Thank you.
Yep. And so talking about that Git integration, if you've worked, if you're familiar with kind of the previous options for Git integration with Power BI, they were pretty bad. They were pretty abysmal because Power BI files were stored as binary files, which are not conducive to Git integration. Recently, with the PBIP file for data models, and even more recently for the PBIR file for report files, that has changed. And now both data models and reports are very source control friendly, which has been a huge, I can't overstate how much better it is now working with version control with Power BI than it was before these two formats. And Microsoft has integrated Git into the rest of the Fabric workflow as well. So it's very easy to version control pipelines and warehouses and data lakes. I will say, because Fabric is new and the Git integration is new as well, some things aren't supported, some capabilities just aren't there yet. But the direction that they're heading is awesome. And particularly for Power BI developers, even if you ignore the rest of the Fabric capabilities, as a Power BI developer, the Git capabilities available to you now as compared to a year ago are really miles ahead of where they used to be. And it's just the best. I can't say it any other way. So through this process, we had quite a few learnings. Very tactically, the metadata scanner API, and we can drop a link to that already if it's not been provided. The documentation is a little limited, so it's hard to know what data is going to be returned from the API for each of the items. So this took a lot of trial and error of extracting the JSON kind of visually and manually inspecting it, and then building code to extract the elements that we wanted. So it'd be nice if it was a little bit more full coverage in terms of documentation. Fabric does not have a way to handle credentials. So if you've got like a password or a secret for service principal, there's no integrated way to store that securely so that you don't have to, copy and paste the credential multiple times. Azure has that in Azure Key Vault, and we'd love to see something similar like that in Fabric so that everything can be all in one and we don't have to stand up one single Azure service, Azure Key Vault, to obtain this secret management capability that we're looking for. And then the biggest, and we've heard this from a lot of clients, Fabric is new. It GA'd late last year, and because of that, new things have bugs and new things are missing features that you'd like to have. So that was something that we were constantly running into where, hey, we really want to do X, but it's not available, or it's not available until next month. And so we had to be flexible with building this where we build what we could now, and then next month or two, when that feature arrives, we incorporate it into our solution. So this is, not surprising for a new product. We've seen clients be concerned, like, is this ready for prime time? Can we start using it? And our answer is yes. You just have to be aware that there may need to be workarounds before functionality that you're interested in is available. But they ship out new functionality every month. Today was a brand new release of Fabric functionality. If you go to the Microsoft Fabric blog, you'll see all the new features that were released. The Microsoft team is doing a fantastic job at pumping out new features and keeping the community up to date in terms of what's available now and what's coming. In terms of the good, the Git integration, as I've talked about already, really, really amazing. There's a learning curve to learning Git, but Fabric and Power BI make it easy now. And again, particularly from that Power BI developer perspective, if you're not using version control, you should start. It'll make your lives and collaboration with your teammates much easier. It gives you that peace of mind that even if I change something today, I can always go back and fix it or roll back if I need to. And it's really much more seamless than it was before, which required much more complex integrations and workarounds. For a Python developer, I've really enjoyed branching out into the notebooks in the Python world, and the fact that Fabric makes this all available without having to stand up your own environment or configure resources behind the scenes. You can just go to a workspace, open up a notebook, and start writing code. And 5 seconds later, your code will be executed. And then from there, you can share it with anyone else the same way that you shared things in Power BI. It's really been amazing. I think one of the primary benefactors of Fabric will be the BI developer who's mainly worked in Power BI or other visualization tools in the past, and maybe played around with Python or played around with some programming languages, but just the barrier to entry was too high. That barrier of entry is gone, and there's so much power at your fingertips. I highly recommend digging in and figuring out ways that you can streamline your workflow, help your organization, help your team by leveraging some of these new capabilities. And the last one I'll mention, and this does have an asterisk, is Fabric just works. The big asterisk there is if you're missing functionality, then it may not work for your exact use case. But in our scenario of reaching out to an API, taking the data, storing it in a lakehouse, doing some transformations, and then building a report on top and sharing it with business users, it is seamless. There's so little to set up. Microsoft has done a great job taking away all those integration challenges that we used to face in Azure and making a SaaS platform that by and large just works. And they're aware of the gaps and they're fixing them actively. So we've been very happy working in Fabric so far, and are really excited to see where Microsoft is able to take it over the next couple months and next year. I think the future is very bright. So just to wrap this up, final slide. Is something like this for me or for my organization. And what we've seen is a couple of different scenarios where this really makes a lot of sense. First is your organization is new to Fabric and they really just want to get off on the right foot. They know monitoring is important. Maybe adoption of previous platforms didn't go that well and you're wanting to make sure that this one really gets going. This is a great use case. You can build out a similar solution, and as you start onboarding more users, you have the data in front of you to support decisions that you're making and help users understand the platform, grow with the platform, which in turn will improve adoption and the success of your implementation. The best scenario in my mind is an organization that's been using Power BI for however many years, but never really took the time to put that monitoring and that governance in place. We've heard from the client, if a client, it feels like the wild, wild west. We don't know who has access to what. We don't know if there's duplication. We've got measures and metrics that aren't matching. This is the perfect scenario to take a step back, take some time to build out the solution, and then have all this data at your fingertips. So you really can start to understand, do we have an issue with metrics matching or mismatch? Do we have users that have access to data they shouldn't have? The amount of data that we can provide or that can be provided from a solution like this very quickly is amazing, and exactly what's needed in these scenarios where you're just not sure what's going on in the platform.
Hey, Jordan, I just got to say, the first icon on the left, that's the ideal. The one in the middle, I hear that a lot. Like, they're like, oh no, everyone loves Power BI. What's going on out there in the world? It is the Wild West if you don't.
Exactly. Spaghetti code, spaghetti processes, how you want to frame it. That's just how things happen, right? Like, business moves fast, processes don't always keep up, and you end up in a scenario where people love Power BI. It's adopted across the organization, but from a governance and an auditing and a implementation point of view, it just doesn't have the rigor that you want. And this also can lead to cost implications, right? So if your tenant is just poorly managed or you don't have the visibility that you need, you may just be throwing more money at it to buy more capacities or more whatever, and that could impact your costs. When in fact there could be some optimizations that you could start to work on if you had the data to understand it.
I think that's a really important point. If you really understand what's going on, you can actually save your company money, right? If you're monitoring appropriately. We might not need another P1 SKU or a P2 SKU. We might need something different.
Exactly. So, like you don't know what you can't see with data really. And so having that data in front of you won't solve anything per se, but it will give you the tools that you need to make the decisions that you need to make to solve those problems, whether they're on a governance perspective, a cost perspective, a security perspective. Data is king in those scenarios, and these APIs and a solution like this provides that data in full. And then the last one here is, maybe you're new to Power BI and new to Fabric, and you're interested in kind of seeing what a use case or a POC might look like, but you don't have a good use case yourself. This is a great self-contained POC to say, I'm going to use Fabric to extract some data from APIs, save it somewhere, build some reports. This would be a great POC to get you going in that direction, just to see how the pieces of Fabric fit together, and give you a sense of what other things might be possible for me and my organization, given our unique landscape and culture and stuff like that. So there's probably other scenarios. These are three that we've seen really common and seem to resonate with people. But ultimately, Fabric, fantastic platform. The metadata scanner APIs provide a ton of data. And when you combine those together, you end up with a really nice solution that provides a ton of business value. So with that, thank you so much for joining us today. Hopefully I was able to share some things that got you thinking or got you interested in either the metadata scanner APIs or a little bit more interested in Fabric. But yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Hey, Jordan, can I drop your email in the chat? I know it was in the slide deck, but is it okay if I put it in the chat for those that might have questions?
Sure, absolutely.
All right.
Please feel free to reach out. I'll drop my LinkedIn there as well. But I think we've got 8 minutes left, right, Russ?
Yeah, we do. Yeah. Any questions or any suggestions, anything from the community before we wrap up this month's session? All right, Jordan, that was awesome. You need to go back and read the chat, Jordan. You're getting a lot of high fives and props during the chat. Okay. And there was a lot of great sharing of like best practices, how to go learn DAX, books, websites. This is a great conversation out there. So thank you everyone for contributing.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks everybody.